From Eyewitness News, this is Newsmakers.
The prospect of impeaching a president is not something that I take lightly.
A momentous move by Congressman Jim Langevin, joining over 100 House colleagues in support of impeachment hearings against President Trump. The 10-term Democrat cited the report by special counsel Robert Mueller and warns he thinks the rule of law is at stake. Langevin has now been in Congress for nearly 2 decades, but how much longer will his district exist? And if Rhode Island is downgraded to 1 House seat after the 2020 election, will he run or retire? This week on Newsmakers, Congressman Jim Langevin. Welcome to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. Joining me on the program, as always, Eyewitness News reporter Ted Nesi. Congressman Jim Langevin, it's good to have you back in the program.
Thank you. It's great to be back.
So let's start with the impeachment proceedings. Last week you announced you now support impeachment proceedings against President Trump. What gave you the change of heart?
I support the impeachment inquiry, and primarily the reason is I don't take the prospect of impeaching a president lightly at all. It's something that I had to think through very carefully. And as I'm watching the proceedings and the Mueller testimony and having read the Mueller report, and knowing that there's still unanswered questions in terms of witnesses that the Judiciary Committee wants to have testify in open session, who have refused to comply with subpoenas, documents, other records and witness testimony that the chairman of the Judiciary Committee has asked for and subpoenaed and has been denied by the administration. I'm convinced that going the route of the impeachment inquiry is a logical and important next step. The courts inherently are reluctant to get involved in fights between the executive and the legislative branch. It's more like, guys, work it out yourselves. And so the court may have broader latitude to deny certain records requests or honoring subpoenas and such that nature. The issue of impeachment, however, is clearly within the constitutional authority and powers of the Congress. And the courts, in my understanding, and not being an attorney, but in being briefed and understanding the issue more thoroughly, the courts will have much more narrow latitude in denying the requests of the House of Representatives Judiciary Committee in its investigation when it's asking for the court to direct witnesses to appear and honor the subpoena or the records that we have the Judiciary Committee has subpoenaed. So that is my primary reason for supporting the impeachment inquiry, and hopefully we will be successful in now having those witnesses and documents produced.
Do you think, based on current evidence, there is enough evidence to vote to impeach the president for you?
It's unclear at this point. That's a decision that the Congress will make. First of all, the Judiciary Committee, when it completes its investigation, having all the witness testimony and access to records that it wants, will make that determination and make that full recommendation then to the House of Representatives, and the House may in fact vote on an impeachment.
There was a vote on Al Green's resolution, and you split with Congressman Cicilline and Kennedy. You and Bill Keating voted no on that. They were ready to proceed with impeachment now.
Well, first of all, I want the Judiciary Committee to thoroughly do its work, and right now it hasn't been able to do that. That's why the impeachment inquiry will give it, I believe, stronger authority and standing to get the witnesses and the records that it needs to complete its investigation. And then a determination on impeachment will be made by the committee and then recommendation to the House.
But you're not there yet.
So, no, I'm looking at all the issues and the facts, but clearly in the Mueller report, there is nothing in that report that the president should be proud of. The fact that it was clearly an intent to obstruct justice when he ordered White House counsel Don McGahn to have the Attorney General fire Mueller, Director Mueller, and shut down the investigation. That's all very troubling. And in Director Mueller's own testimony, they didn't look at that in terms of whether or not the president could be charged because of Justice Department policy. Ostensibly, what he's saying there is that in Justice Department policy, and I believe the Constitution, does leave that to the Congress to ultimately make that determination as to whether the president obstructed justice. And that's exactly the process that the Judiciary Committee is going through right now to make that determination, and ultimately, potentially the full House will make that determination whether it's an impeachable offense.
So you don't feel, as some other lawmakers do, that Mueller shirked his responsibility by not making a choice when it came to obstruction of justice?
I wish the director had gone that extra step and was more clear. and had looked at and perhaps made that determination. I think there were several former prosecutors who were surprised that he did not go that far. But I'm not going to, at this point, second guess Director Mueller. The Congress is now taking up this issue, and I believe it will make a determination.
There are so many factors, there's potential fallout if Congress goes forward with the impeachment inquiry. And a big one is the potential political fallout. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, you're at odds with her on this issue. She is concerned that this could be bad for Democrats to move forward with the impeachment proceedings. We saw that for Republicans with President Clinton when they moved forward there. Is there a risk for Democrats to push towards impeachment?
Oh, I definitely think there's a risk, a political risk, in the sense that I think in some ways President Trump wants this fight, and it very well could rally his base and could help him in his re-election effort, quite frankly. I don't think this is necessarily smart politics, but at the end of the day, I have a higher calling and commitment to honor the principles of the Constitution, the rule of law, and holding this president accountable, even if it may not be good politics, and if it helps him in his re-election, which would trouble me, and I don't want that to happen, of course, but ultimately we have to have a stronger commitment to the rule of law and the Constitution and accountability, and that's why I voted in favor. I'm supporting the impeachment inquiry.
I can hear some Republicans, though, saying, well, it may not be good politics for getting the president out, but it might be good politics for you as a Democratic congressman in a blue state who was facing pressure from the left. Why aren't you out front on impeachment like we want? Because there's such hostility toward the president among the Democratic base. I mean, did that play into your calculation here?
Well, listen to my constituents, certainly, but I can tell you that there are people feel strongly on both sides of this issue. I'm sure if you've read the Providence Journal the last couple of days, there are a couple of very opinionated people that wrote letters together that were opposed to my support for the impeachment inquiry. So there are people who have very strong feelings on both sides of the issue, and I listen intently to my constituents as they voice those concerns on both sides, and I weighed all the facts and the evidence and this whole process. I didn't rush to this. I don't rush into something like this, and I was very thoughtful, deliberative, and ultimately I'm comfortable where I arrived, but I was not under pressure per se to just rush into something. I would have, if it was pressure, I would have done it perhaps long ago, but this is not something I was going to rush into.
Did you reach out to the House Speaker, to Speaker Pelosi, to let her know that, hey, I'm going to come out and say this?
I did. I spoke to both Chairman Jerry Nadler, and I spoke to Speaker Pelosi, and I let her know that I had arrived after much thought and deliberation, and this is what I'm comfortable doing right now.
And what did she say?
Well, she said, look, Jim, you have to do what you feel is right for your district and the way you see this. She's not there yet, and she thinks that certainly more information gathering it needs to have happen. And she said that the Judiciary Committee is doing its investigation, so we are continuing to look at all aspects of this. I just think, and again, after my calculations and consultation with colleagues and constituents, that this just puts us in a much stronger position constitutionally to get the access to witnesses, their testimony, and other testimony that we need.
How big a deal would it be if the Speaker was there and did support impeachment inquiries? How many dominoes would fall at that point? Would it just be an avalanche of support in the caucus?
Oh, I think certainly that her leadership and her opinion certainly matters to other members, certainly members that perhaps are on the fence. So I leave that to her determination. She has a lot of things to weigh, as did I, and I don't know where she'll arrive at the end of the day, but I respect whatever her opinion on this issue, whatever she decides.
We're talking today as we prepare for the next round of Democratic presidential debates. Looks like there's only going to be one this time because they've whittled down the candidates enough. And I'm curious of your view on something that's come up a number of times that's drawing some heated debate, I would say, which is the discussion around Medicare for All, and specifically some of your party's presidential hopefuls saying they will support abolishing private health insurance if they are elected president. They will push for that. Would you vote to abolish private health insurance if a Democratic president proposes it?
So I'm a co-sponsor of the Medicare for All bill, and ultimately that is a lofty goal that we should shoot for. We should try to achieve. The important thing is universal health care coverage so that everyone is covered. That is what I ultimately want to see. So I think, first of all, we need to strengthen, build on, and expand the Affordable Care Act. It's been very successful in many ways, covering people with pre-existing conditions and covering millions more people that had previously not received coverage. But the Trump administration and my Republican colleagues in Congress have done absolutely everything they possibly can do to weaken and choke off and possibly try to destroy the Affordable Care Act.
And that's why some Democrats say we shouldn't bother with sort of iterative steps like the ACA. We got to abolish private health insurance and move to a whole new system.
Yeah. Well, again, I think Medicare for All is the goal that we should be achieving. I think we will get there incrementally. What I'd like to see, for example, is adding a public option in every state in the country. That right off the bat is going to force competition between the public option and private insurers. It's going to force private insurers to innovate and really sharpen their pencil, and it's going to bring down rates automatically because you're going to have competition. And by the way, if the public option is far better than private insurance, people are just going to migrate to that. We may get to Medicare for All just by
But
it's
it's fair to say then that you want to take steps in between. You are not a vote in 2021 if there's a Democratic president who wants this to just get rid of everybody who has private health insurance and immediately have a public option for everyone.
Well, again, I want to have universal health care coverage. Let me see what was proposed in 2020. If we have a Democratic House, Senate, and White House, and it's realistically that we can get it done. I think once we do have Medicare for All, by the way, that we will also have some elements of private insurance, and that just like we have Medicare right now, and then you have supplemental insurance for other aspects that you might want more full coverage for. So there's going to be a variety of things that would be on the table. Universal health care is what my goal is, and how we get there, we can get there through a variety of paths. But what is happening right now, because of the Trump administration and my Republican colleagues who are trying to choke off the ACA, more people threatened than ever before have either lost their insurance or are struggling to afford it, even if they do have it. The issue of and by the way, the Trump administration are fighting the ACA in courts, including they want to completely eliminate it, rule it unconstitutional if possible. That means people that are covered with pre-existing conditions would no longer be covered. That is really, it's despicable. It makes me so angry, and I'm frustrated by it. I hope that we are going to have a Democratic president in the White House in 2020 that is going to stop this foolishness of the Trump administration, the dangerous path that he's bringing on, not to mention how he's dividing the country and sowing hate in the country.
We are already at a break, but before we go to commercial, I briefly want to talk about this. 2 weeks ago, you presented the family of Vietnam vet Steve Kilgore with medals for his service. Channel 12 was there for the honors, and we have some video from that day. Can you tell us what the story is behind those medals? Well,
first of all, these medal presentation ceremonies are always very special and important. And we were contacted by Sergeant Kilgore's family. Sadly, Sergeant Kilgore passed away this past March, and we were able to present the medals to his family posthumously on that he had earned, and he served with distinction in the United States Army and earned the Bronze Star and 2 Purple Hearts, as well as several other medals. And it was a very nice tribute to his service, and I'm glad that we could present those medals to his family. As I said, we do these from time to time when we're approached, and we get in contact with families. We learn of the issues, and not long ago we presented several medals to Chief Warrant Officer James Bowen, who received the Silver Star and several other medals. Another inspiring story. And I'm very honored to be able to present those medals. It's one of the privileges I have as a congressman, to be able to honor our service members who put so much on the line for us. Some we've done who have been World War II veterans, and then through the career of Vietnam. But we are always grateful for the service of our men and women in uniform.
Our guest this week is Congressman Jim Langevin. When we come back in the very near future, it's highly likely Rhode Island will have only 1 congressional seat. We'll unpack that prickly topic when we return. Stay with us. You're watching Newsmakers. Welcome back to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. To my left, Eyewitness News reporter Ted Nesi. Our guest this week is Congressman Jim Langevin. If you are a regular reader of Nesi's notes on WPRI.com, you will know that Rhode Island has had at least 2 congressional seats since 1793. All indications are 2020 will be the last time and will drop to 1 for the 2022 elections. Congressman, you've obviously thought about this issue because it affects you directly. How are you planning?
Well, I'm planning to run for re-election in 2020, and beyond that, I don't know what is going to occur. We have to wait to see what the census numbers are. I hope that Rhode Island does keep 2 congressional seats, but again, it'll be determined by the census, not only here but around the country. But my focus right now is the 2020 elections, and I'm running for re-election.
Look, it's no secret that the common assumption in town is that if we go down to 1 seat, you will leave the House. That David Cicilline will take it because he's in leadership now, and that maybe you'll run for something back here or something. Is that, are people wrong to assume that you wouldn't run in a 2022 1-seat race?
Honestly, I'm not even thinking about it right now.
I got to tell you, that's hard to believe that you're not thinking about that. That is such a seismic.
I'm focusing on 2020. I do not ever want to take any election for granted. I never have, I never will, I never take any vote for granted. Never have, never will. I'm focusing on doing my job, and I'm running for re-election in 2020.
If Channel 12 told me my job was likely to disappear in 2022, even though it's a couple years away, I would be thinking about it, though.
Well, look, all I can tell you is that I've got a lot on my plate right now. There's a lot of work to do in Washington. I'm focusing on things like how do we make healthcare affordable? How do we bring down the high cost of prescription drugs? How do we expand job opportunities, increase wages, and the bread and butter issues that my constituents are dealing with back home? Those are my priorities right now, not about elections down the road. I am focusing on 2020 and the work I'm doing in Congress, and that's the facts.
It can't escape us that easily. So if you look, thinking about 22, though, your name also comes up for every statewide office practically is going to open up at the state level. Governor, lieutenant governor, secretary of state, which you've already been, et cetera. Do you have any interest in considering, coming home? I know you come home a lot, but, leaving the Washington scene, especially in this climate, and maybe running for something at the state level in 22?
Well, I'm hoping that we have a Democratic president in 2020, and the landscape's going to change quite a bit, especially if we had a Democratic Senate as well. And a lot of the things that I just talked about in terms of fighting for more affordable health care and bringing down prescription drug costs and raising wages and helping people that have been struggling for years and years now, living paycheck to paycheck and not seeing their wages rise and not really feel like they're realizing the American dream. Their lives hopefully will change for the better in a very dramatic, positive way if we had those House, Senate, and White House all in Democratic hands. And that's going to be an exciting time to be there in Washington and to make these changes. So that's my focus, both, again, my re-election, hopefully, and working on behalf of whoever our Democratic nominee is.
Well, speaking of that, I know you're not ready to endorse anybody. I'm not asking you that. But is there any of the Democratic presidential candidates you are watching with interest?
So, first of all, I'm watching the candidate who's going to most likely to be most effective at defeating Donald Trump in 2020. And so, whoever she is, I'm going to learn to love him. And we have some great Democratic nominees. I'm excited about the prospect of getting on with the election and entering seeing our candidate enter the presidential race and as our nominee. And but there are several.
No standouts for you yet?
Well, I think
you've been in politics a long time. If you see someone with talent,
the people, I think it's kind of going down to 10 now. They are quality candidates. I think any one of them who would do a better job than President Trump right now. And so certainly, obviously, Joe Biden seems to be the front runner right now, and is the kind of the institutional backing, if you will. I think a lot of infrastructure. Kamala Harris, I think, is very distinguished herself. I know her, and I'm very impressed with her.
How do you know her? Just from working in Congress?
Work in Congress. Have been with her at several events. I mean, I know that she's been here. She's been here to Rhode Island a couple of times, as I recall, and then issues that or events we've attended in Washington. I was at a rally with her a couple of years ago for the Supreme Court. I think the issue was probably immigration at the time. But she's very distinguished herself. As well as Beto O'Rourke, Pete Buttigieg as maybe a real breakout candidate. He's someone that was very surprising breakout candidate.
You're going to name all 10 candidates. So what?
Amy Klobuchar. So.
Okay. Earlier this summer, Speaker Pelosi held a closed-door meeting with House Democrats in an attempt to set the tone, I guess, within the caucus. Were you at that meeting?
I believe I was. I'm not sure if I was there or not. I attended all of them, but.
Well, the topic here is there's a sense that within the Democratic Congress there's a divide, particularly between Speaker Pelosi and the 4 freshman Democrats known as the Squad. Is that true? Do you feel that there's a divide within your caucus right now, politically?
Well, we're a caucus with a big tent, right? And there are varied views on issues that run the spectrum in the Democratic Party, and this is certainly no exception. We do have 4 high-profile candidates known as the Squad that have come in as freshmen with bold ideas and energy, and so it's certainly been, I think, a challenge for Nancy Pelosi to weigh all these equities and, again, unify the caucus and lead us forward. So I have been very impressed with Nancy Pelosi, even more so this time than perhaps the last time when she served as Speaker, and she's really risen to the occasion, and I think she's doing a very effective job speaking for the caucus, leading the caucus, and confronting Donald Trump where appropriate.
I want to ask you, you mentioned your re-election campaign. You're running again in 2020. Congressman Cicilline and Senator Whitehouse have taken a pledge not to take any donations from corporate PACs. Why haven't you?
Well, first of all, you have to look at where those PAC contributions come from and how they assemble them. Those contributions from labor PACs or other PACs come from generally people giving 25 cents or 50 cents or $1 out of their paycheck each week, and those contributions are then bundled, and then the organization makes a determination which candidates they trust, that they're most aligned with their views, and who they feel they want to see continue in office. So in my mind, one PAC contribution is like the other in terms of how it's bundled, and it comes from employee contributions. So,
but I'm talking about corporate PACs specifically, not labor PACs. Yeah. You've gotten money from Boeing, from Textron, from
but they all get them the same way. It's from the employees themselves who some are in a labor organization, others are not. It comes from the same way. What I believe, it's about transparency and where does the money come from. I oppose dark money, and we need to get more money out of politics. I think that has too much of an influence in general. And although I have voted several times, both to rein in money in politics, going back to the Shays-Meehan bill and then McCain-Feingold and other measures to take money out of politics, and voting for, by the way, H.R. 1 that we just voted on is a result of the Democrats taking control of Congress, that would have shown more accountability in where the contributions come from, and getting rid of or having sunlight on dark money that's in politics. Unfortunately, what happens is every time we try to rein in money in politics, the Supreme Court rules it unconstitutional.
But this is a step you could take to rein in money in politics, at least in your district, by saying I won't take corporate PACs like Senator Whitehouse and Congressman Cicilline.
But again, where do they come from? They come from employee contributions.
Then why should you go to the Supreme Court to reduce money in politics in the first place if the money all comes from great places?
Yeah, again, I say if we're going to do one, you do all. And I'm saying that it's about transparency. It's about the employees, that whether they work in the corporate office or whether they're in a labor organization, it's all the same thing. In terms of, I want to see money out of politics in general. But the way to do that, I'm convinced, is going to be through a constitutional amendment. The Supreme Court Citizens United decision opened the floodgates to more money coming to politics, corporate money coming to politics, unlimited spending, saying that corporations are people. It's just all outrageous. What we need is a constitutional amendment that gives Congress clear power to regulate money in politics, hopefully getting rid of a lot of money in politics. Ultimately, I'd like to see a public financing of campaigns.
Just about 30 seconds left here, Congressman. It's likely not a matter of if, but when Rhode Island legalizes the recreational use of marijuana. You're a resident here. Do you support or oppose it?
So it took me a long time to support the medical use of marijuana, and there's definitely something to it. We need to have more study and more academic research done on the medicinal benefits of marijuana. In terms of recreational use of marijuana, I'm not ready to support.
You're not there yet?
Not yet. I don't say never, but right now I'm not ready to rush into supporting recreational use of marijuana.
All right, Congressman Jim Langevin, thank you very much for joining us this week on the program. I want everybody out there to have a happy and safe Labor Day weekend. If you missed any of the program, it's on WPRI.com. And don't forget to sign up for our Newsmakers podcast. You can do that through iTunes. For Ted Nesi, I'm Tim White. We'll see you next week on Newsmakers. Thank you.